I've seen a lot of wild things while traveling, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepare me for the day a full-grown Karen tried to pick a fight with the Queen's Guard and lost in spectacular fashion. One moment, she was strutting around Buckingham Palace like she owned the place, complaining about how rude the guards were. The next, she was soaked, humiliated, and very much arrested, all because she thought slapping a royal guard was a good idea. Spoiler, it wasn't. Buckingham Palace was even more breathtaking in person than I had imagined. The intricate gold detailing on the gates, the sheer scale of the building, the crisp uniforms of the Queen's Guard standing like statues. It all felt surreal, like stepping into a postcard. I had been standing near the front of the crowd, watching the guards with quiet admiration when she appeared. Even before she spoke, I could tell she was going to be a problem. You know the type. Middle-aged, dripping in designer brands, her purse worth more than most people's rent, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, surveying the world as if everything existed solely for her entertainment. She had that distinct aura of entitlement, the kind that made waiters brace themselves and retail workers suddenly remember they had something to do in the back. At first, she was just standing there, arms crossed, lips pursed in a sour expression, but then she let out an exaggerated sigh, loud enough for people around her to hear. Honestly, she muttered, shaking her head, I thought the British were supposed to have manners. A few tourists glanced in her direction, confused, but she didn't care. She was already ramping up. Look at them, she scoffed, motioning toward the guards, her voice dripping with condescension. So rude. I followed her gaze to the guards in their traditional red uniforms and tall black bearskin hats, standing perfectly still in front of the palace gates, unfazed by the hundreds of tourists milling about. It took me a second to even register what she was complaining about, because, of course, they weren't being rude. They were doing their job. But she wasn't done. She rolled her eyes, shifting her designer handbag onto her shoulder with an indignant huff. They don't even smile. What? Are they trained to ignore people? That's their whole job? Stand there and act like robots. Her voice had that grating quality that made it impossible to ignore, and now people were starting to listen. Not because they agreed, but because they could tell this was about to go somewhere bad. A few tourists chuckled awkwardly, clearly unsure if she was joking, but Karen took it as encouragement. I mean, really, she continued, turning to a poor man standing too close. What's even the point of them? They're basically glorified mannequins. The man gave a tight-lipped smile, obviously not wanting to engage, but Karen wasn't interested in an actual conversation. She was performing. It's ridiculous, she went on, shaking her head like she had just uncovered the world's greatest injustice. It's 2024. Why do we still have people standing around like props? It's embarrassing. Someone nearby muttered, it's called tradition, but Karen ignored it. She wasn't looking for an answer. She was looking for an audience. And she had found one. The crowd around her had grown slightly, people giving each other side eyes, silently communicating the same thought. Is she really about to do something? I could already tell. She had that look in her eye, the look of someone who couldn't stand being ignored, who believed the world owed her attention. I watched as she took a step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her jaw set with determination. Well, she announced, as if she had just decided to take on some grand social experiment. I'm going to find out for myself. My stomach clenched. Even though I'd only been here a few days, I knew one thing for certain. You do not mess with the Queen's Guard. Everyone knew it. Everyone respected it. But Karen? Karen saw it as a challenge. And in that moment, as she squared her shoulders and took another step forward, I knew this was about to turn into something much, much worse than just a loud tourist complaining about tradition. Karen had that look in her eye, the one people get right before they do something so profoundly stupid that it becomes the defining moment of their day, or maybe even their life. She strutted forward, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, positioning herself directly in front of one of the guards. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and completely unmoved by her presence, standing there with the kind of discipline that only years of training could instill. His rifle was held at his side, polished and pristine, his hat casting a shadow over his face. If he had noticed her, he gave no sign of it. That only seemed to fuel Karen's irritation. Oh, come on, she huffed, placing a hand on her hip. Not even a blink? Were they robots? She turned dramatically, as if waiting for someone in the crowd to back her up, but all she got were a few amused smirks and some cautious glances. The atmosphere had shifted. People weren't just watching out of curiosity anymore. Now, they were watching like you do when you know something is about to go terribly, terribly wrong. Fine, Karen muttered, rolling her shoulders like a boxer preparing for a fight. Let's see how real you are. She took another step forward and did something that made my stomach drop. She waved a hand directly in front of the guard's face, fingers snapping like she was trying to get the attention of a distracted waiter. He didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't acknowledge her existence in the slightest. Karen let out an exaggerated laugh, turning back to the crowd with a smug grin, as if she had just proven some kind of point. See? Nothing. They're basically wax figures in expensive costumes. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a few people pulling out their phones, sensing that this was only going to escalate. I wanted to look away, pretend I wasn't witnessing whatever disaster was about to unfold, but I couldn't. It was like watching a car veer off the road in slow motion. Horrifying, yet impossible to ignore. Karen wasn't satisfied with just snapping in his face. No, she needed more. What's wrong? She taunted, tilting her head mockingly. Can't say anything? Or are you just not allowed to think for yourself? She took another step, close enough now that she was nearly nose to chest with him. She was towing a dangerous line, but she didn't seem to care. She wanted a reaction, any reaction, and when she didn't get one, she upped the ante. With a dramatic scoff, she stepped directly into his marching path, forcing him to halt. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. You could feel the tension shift, the weight of her mistake settling into the air like a storm about to break. The guard, still stone-faced, stood there, unmoving, but something about the moment felt charged, like the calm before the thunder. The crowd had fallen completely silent now. No more chuckles, no more murmurs, just wide-eyed anticipation. But Karen, oblivious to the atmosphere around her, mistook the silence for encouragement. She turned back to the crowd, as if expecting applause, and spread her arms. Look, he's just standing there. No reaction at all, she exclaimed, shaking her head in mock disbelief. Is this really what British taxes pay for? A bunch of guys playing dress-up? There was a shifting in the crowd now. People weren't just uncomfortable, they were waiting. The energy had changed, thick with the knowledge that she had pushed things too far. Someone muttered, "Oh, she's done for," but Karen didn't hear it. She was too busy reveling in her own arrogance. And then, she made her biggest mistake yet. She reached out, grabbed the edge of his sleeve, and yanked. "Oh, come on," she snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. "Do something, you're not a robot." And in that moment, every single person watching knew she had just sealed her fate. For a brief second, everything seemed frozen in place. The guard, standing tall and unmoving. The crowd, holding their collective breath. Karen, her smug expression still plastered across her face, unaware of the magnitude of what she had just done. Then, as if in slow motion, the energy in the air shifted. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the crowd. The moment when everyone except Karen, realized she had just crossed an invisible but very real line. But she still didn't get it. No, she was still caught up in her little performance, basking in the attention she thought she was commanding. When the guard didn't react to her yanking his sleeve, she let out an exaggerated sigh, shaking her head dramatically as if he were the one being unreasonable. Seriously? Nothing, she scoffed, turning slightly toward the crowd, as if waiting for them to laugh along with her. Some of them had their phones up now, recording, because at this point it was no longer just a tourist being obnoxious. It was a spectacle, and people knew something was about to happen. Karen, however, was too wrapped up in her own self-importance to notice. "What's the point of you guys if you can't even react?" she continued, her voice rising in frustration. "Do you even feel anything under that stupid hat?" And then, as if to prove her point, she did the unthinkable. She lifted her hand and slap. The sound echoed through the courtyard, loud and sharp, slicing through the stunned silence like a knife. It wasn't a brutal hit, more of a firm, open-palm slap, the kind a bratty child might use to test boundaries, but it didn't matter. It was a slap, to a Queen's Guard, a royal guard. The weight of what she had just done hit the crowd first. Gasps rippled through the spectators like a wave, a mix of shock, disbelief, and second-hand horror. Someone audibly muttered, "Oh, she's done," while another tourist whispered, "She just signed her own death warrant." A man near me actually took off his sunglasses like he couldn't believe what his eyes had just witnessed. People weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. Karen, however, still didn't see the train wreck she had just stepped in front of. She let out a dramatic laugh, shaking her wrist as if she were the one who had just been inconvenienced. "Oh, come on," she huffed, rolling her eyes. Not even that gets a reaction. She waved her hand in the air, scoffing. This is ridiculous. You guys act like you're so important, but you're just glorified lawn ornaments. And that's when it happened. In one swift, precise motion, the guard stepped forward, just one step, but it was enough to make Karen freeze. The way he moved wasn't aggressive, wasn't uncontrolled. It was measured, deliberate, the kind of disciplined movement that only comes from years of unwavering training. He lifted his rifle, his grip firm, and then, with a voice that boomed like thunder rolling through the square, he barked a command so loud and forceful that it sent an actual shockwave through the crowd. Make way for the Queen's Guard. It was less of a statement and more of an explosion, a powerful, commanding roar that was designed to clear a path, to shake the very ground it was spoken upon. And it did. The sheer force of his voice sent Karen stumbling backward, her confidence evaporating in an instant. The cocky smirk vanished from her face, replaced by something else entirely, pure, undiluted panic. But the nightmare was just beginning. The moment the words left his mouth, it was like a switch had been flipped. Karen, who had spent the last several minutes acting like she owned the place, visibly shrank. The confidence, the smug amusement, the absolute belief that she was untouchable, it all drained from her face in real time. You could actually see the exact second she realized she had royally messed up. Her mouth opened, maybe to argue, maybe to throw out some half-baked excuse, but no words came. Instead, she let out a choked noise somewhere between a gasp and a pathetic squeak. The air around us had shifted entirely. The stunned murmurs of the crowd had turned into a chorus of awed disbelief. People whispering, a few laughing under their breath, others just staring in wide-eyed anticipation. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. No one wanted to miss a second of what was about to unfold. Because at this point, it wasn't just a scene anymore, it was a spectacle. And Karen was about to become the star of a moment that would live on in tourist lore for years to come. But before she could even fully process what was happening, there was a sharp, piercing whistle, one so loud and commanding that it sent a shiver up my spine. Karen flinched at the sound, her entire body jerking as if she'd been physically struck. It had come from another guard, a second Queen's Guard, standing near the entrance of the palace gates. His expression was unreadable, his stance unwavering, but the message was clear. The SLAP had escalated things to an entirely different level. And Karen? She had no idea what to do now. That brief moment of hesitation was all it took. Like clockwork, two uniformed security officers, big guys built like they wrestled bears in their free time, materialized out of nowhere, striding toward her with the kind of quiet authority that made it very clear they weren't here for small talk. Karen spun, eyes darting between them and the guard she had slapped, and you could see the dawning horror creeping into her expression. This wasn't just some minor misunderstanding. This wasn't just some harmless little joke gone too far. She was in trouble. Real, serious, can't talk your way out of this kind of trouble. And the funniest part? She knew it, but she still had no idea how to react. Instead of immediately stepping away, instead of apologizing, not that it would have helped her at this point, she did the worst possible thing she could have done. She panicked. And when some people panic, they freeze. But Karen? Karen tried to run. Not a smart, calculated escape attempt, either. No, she whipped around and bolted, right into the guard she had just slapped. And let me tell you, it was like watching a pigeon fly directly into a glass window. She hit his broad, unmoving chest full force, let out a startled yelp, then staggered backward so violently she nearly tripped over her own feet. The guard did not move an inch. He remained as solid and unshaken as ever, rifle still held firm, his gaze never shifting. It was almost eerie, like he was a statue that had been programmed to intimidate without needing to do anything at all. Karen, meanwhile, looked like a mess. Her hair was disheveled, her sunglasses had fallen to the ground, and her face had gone through every shade of red imaginable. And that's when the guard, the same one she had just slapped, took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and did something that sent the entire crowd over the edge. He started marching, directly at her. The moment the guard stepped forward, it was like watching a force of nature unfold in real time. His ceremonial boots hit the ground with a sharp, commanding stomp, his movements precise, unshaken, and completely unbothered by the absolute chaos Karen had just created. And the best part? He didn't break formation. He didn't lunge at her, didn't rush. He just marched the same way he would have if she had never been there at all. And that's when Karen lost it. You ever see a person go from arrogant to petrified in under 2 seconds? Because that's exactly what happened. Her eyes went wide, comically so, as she realized that this wasn't just some bored security guard. This was the Queen's Guard. This was serious. She tried to dodge, try being the key word, jerking her body to the side like a malfunctioning wind-up toy, her arms flailing as she desperately scrambled backward. But the guard? He didn't stop. He didn't slow. He didn't even blink. He just kept marching, right at her. And then, as if the universe itself decided it was time for karma to make its grand entrance, the other guards joined in. 4 of them, in perfect, synchronized unison. If the crowd had been entertained before, they were losing their minds now. People were howling with laughter, phones held high, some even gasping between fits of uncontrollable giggles. One guy near me wiped actual tears from his face, wheezing, "Oh my God, it's like watching a military-grade sheepdog hurt an idiot." And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Because Karen, she was running. Or, at least, she was trying to. It wasn't exactly a graceful sprint. More of a frantic, stumbling retreat, her expensive shoes clicking against the pavement in a way that betrayed just how panicked she truly was. Every time she tried to veer off, the guards simply adjusted, their movements sharp, practiced, relentless. It was like watching a high-stakes game of chess, where she was the only player who had no idea how the rules worked. And the best part? The crowd was fully invested. People cheered. They clapped. A group of tourists started chanting, "Go, go, go," like this was some kind of Royal Olympics event. One guy even yelled, "Long live the Queen," like this was the most patriotic moment of his life. And Karen? She looked miserable. Her face had gone a shade of red. I didn't even know it was possible. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps, her designer purse swinging wildly as she flailed her arms, trying and failing to find an escape route. But there wasn't one. Not really. Because every time she tried to change direction, every time she thought she'd found a way out, the guards were right there, marching, unwavering, unbothered, and completely merciless. And that's when the final blow landed. Because in her blind panic, her total desperation to escape, Karen made one last, horrible mistake. She wasn't watching where she was going. If Karen had been thinking clearly, if she hadn't been completely blinded by sheer, unfiltered panic, maybe, just maybe, she would have noticed the massive stone water trough directly in her path. Maybe she would have seen the way the sunlight reflected off the still, clear surface of the water, or how the polished edges gleamed from years of use by the ceremonial horses stationed at Buckingham Palace. But she didn't. Instead, she was too busy flailing, too busy looking over her shoulder at the 4 guards marching in relentless, terrifying unison, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps, as if she were being chased by the wrath of the monarchy itself. And then, it happened. 1 second, Karen was screeching, waving her arms wildly, as if she could physically ward off the consequences of her own stupidity. And the next? Splash. It was a full-body dunk. Arms, legs, designer purse. Every inch of overpriced fabric she had wrapped herself in that morning, completely and utterly submerged. The sound of her hitting the water was deafening, like a cannon blast cutting through the stunned silence of the crowd. And then, chaos. Absolute, unfiltered chaos. The entire courtyard exploded with laughter, a rolling wave of pure, uncontainable hysteria that spread through the spectators like wildfire. People were howling, doubling over, clutching their stomachs as the sheer, unbelievable perfection of the moment sunk in. I swear I heard one guy collapse to the ground, wheezing, I can't breathe," between fits of uncontrollable cackling. Someone else shouted, "Oh my God, did anyone get that? Please tell me someone got that on camera." And in response, at least 30 people lifted their phones triumphantly in the air. Because of course they had. Of course this moment, this once-in-a-lifetime, truly divine act of karma, was now immortalized on dozens, if not hundreds of camera rolls. Karen, meanwhile, was floundering, sputtering, looking less like the posh, entitled woman she had been 5 minutes ago, and more like a drowned, panicked cat who had just been forcibly baptized by the British monarchy itself. Her perfectly styled hair was plastered to her face, her expensive blouse clinging to her body like a second skin, her sunglasses, her ridiculous, oversized designer sunglasses, now floating a few feet away, bobbing mockingly on the surface of the water. And the best part? The absolute cherry on top of this already perfect disaster? The guards never stopped marching. even as she splashed and flailed. Gasping like a shipwreck victim who had just realized she couldn't swim, the Queen's Guard simply adjusted their trajectory. Not a single one of them looking down, not a single one of them reacting, as if Karen did not exist at all. It was hands down the most brutally elegant dismissal I had ever witnessed in my entire life. But then, as if this day couldn't get any better, Karen's final, miserable fate was sealed. Because while the guards may have been unbothered, security? They were not. Within seconds, the two hulking security officers who had been tailing her from the start descended, their faces unreadable, their movements practiced and efficient. And Karen? She knew. She knew the moment their shadows loomed over her. The moment she looked up, soaked, humiliated, fully and completely defeated, that there was no coming back from this. She tried to talk her way out of it. But have you ever tried to sound authoritative while dripping wet, your makeup running down your face, your voice cracking as you stammer weak excuses that no one, not even yourself, believes? Because that's exactly what Karen did. And it did not work. Within moments, she was being hauled out of the water, her clothes dripping, her shoes squelching, her once perfect arrogance now replaced with the unmistakable look of someone who had just experienced the single worst day of their life. And the crowd? Erupting. People were cheering, clapping, some even saluting the guards in mock reverence. One guy, wiping away actual tears of joy, lifted his phone and shouted, "God save the Queen!" at the top of his lungs, which only set off another wave of riotous laughter. And Karen? She was done. Completely and utterly done. Security dragged her away, her soggy form disappearing through the palace gates, her fate uncertain but unquestionably humiliating. And the guard she slapped? The one who had set this entire masterpiece of karma into motion? He never even blinked. And that, my friends, is what happens when entitlement meets instant karma. Faced with tears of joy, but now I've got to know, what would you have done if you were there? Would you have stepped in, filmed the chaos, or just grabbed some popcorn and enjoyed the show? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear what you think.